Yes, definitely, guys. More surveillance because places like this In-N-Out behind me have turned out to be unexpected hotspots for teens. And unfortunately, not all of these gatherings have ended up peacefully. Gilbert police say they responded to two separate instances just this month. One was due to a large group fight, and another one was because teens were setting off fireworks after a house party. Now, Gilbert police say a lot of these gatherings predominantly are posted on social media, which attracts hundreds of kids to parking lots. Now, with more local businesses sounding the alarm, Gilbert police say they are ramping up patrols in these high traffic areas to get ahead of the chaos before it turns violent. Officers hope by showing a strong presence, they can keep these meetups from spiraling into a kind of reckless behavior that has already made headlines in the East Valley.
A group of people, no matter the people getting together, is not, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's that when you get that large a group and it becomes excessive, um, there's some dynamic that happens that kind of spawns or catalyzes someone to make one decision that turns a safe, orderly gathering or group or function into something that become quickly violent or just unruly, where they're then breaking the law.
And Officer Shepard, who you just heard from, says while they are doing their due diligence, they're also asking parents to step in and do theirs as well. That means have conversations with your kiddos, know where they're at, what they're doing, set those expectations so your kids aren't in these situations. A lot of these kiddos that we're talking about are 15 to 16 years old, so they have a career ahead of them. They have college to go to, and Officer Shepard doesn't want one silly instance to really ruin that for everyone. So these having conversations are really important. We'll send it back to you guys.